then it's 5 guys, then it's 10. Then every night, the whole team's going out. They're eating together. They're talking together. They're living together. And, man, you see that when their backs are against the wall and they're fighting over a century of history, don't you?
Well, Joe, you know, Jonathan, Mike, Colin, Mike, Dad. You guys know that there is a huge change in culture from the previous ownership group to the new ownership group. John Henry, Tom Werner, and of course Larry Lucchino totally changed the way they thought about winning, thought about building teams, and empowering Theo Epstein to be able to make the moves he had to make. 28 years old, 29 at the time, and he's got Nomar, number 5, Noma. He's got the name, as we say in the doc, and he decides this is not going to happen. We've got to get rid of him, and deals them. And the deal does not come through as something that's like spectacular, right? If, you know, it's Mankiewicz and Cabrera. These are 2 guys who don't hit, but they can field, and who knows how this is going to work out. And it becomes a real nerve-wracking thing for Theo, and he just decides we're going to do this. And even Jed Hoyer, his deputy at the time, who's in the doc, who's fantastic, says, you know, we don't know if this is a bottoms-up trade or if this is going to work out, and it ends up working out.
Yeah, and it's, you know, 25 guys going to a restaurant. I'm sure they were going to a restaurant, not a bar. Sure, 25 guys, big reservation.
The new 3-part docuseries, The Comeback, 2004 Boston Red Sox, is streaming right now on Netflix. Director and executive producer Colin Barnacle and executive producer Nick Barnacle. Thank you both. It's weird to say that because we've known them for 18 years. Yeah. Okay, boys.
Extraordinary guys.
How did we ever get on the show?
Calling us the boys.
I don't know, actually. It ends now.
You did something great. Yeah.
We're going to get to our news now. We're hearing now from Trump's longest-serving chief of staff, retired General John Kelly, issuing dire warnings about his former boss. This is the big news of the morning. In taped conversations with New York Times investigative reporter Michael Schmidt, Kelly said the former president meets the definition of a fascist and talked about Trump calling American service members suckers and losers.
Certainly, the former president is in the far right area. He's certainly an authoritarian, admires people who are dictators. He has said that. So he certainly falls into the general definition of fascist, for sure.
But he basically said to you that those who died for America on the battlefield were losers and suckers, and he said it more than once.
Yes, but he would say it would always, that something else would get him going off at times. Again, McCain, he talked about, and it was like almost a recording, but the point is anyways, he would say it at times, sometimes unexpectedly, but he never could wrap his arms around why people would serve the country in uniform. What was in it for them? That was the general theme.
Does he have disdain for the disabled?
Well, certainly his not wanting to be seen with amputees that lost their limbs in defense of this country, fighting for every American, to him included, to protect them, that didn't want to be seen with them. That's an interesting perspective for the commander-in-chief to have.
Why didn't he want to be seen with them?
He would just say, look, it doesn't look good for me.
Kelly is a retired general, as we said. He held the position of chief of staff longer than anyone in the Trump administration. He was also asked about Trump's understanding of the Constitution.
And did the former president appreciate the Constitution? Did he appreciate any of these things?
No. It was fascinating. I mean, he doesn't know a lot about, American history, and certainly as a I guess a former executive in his civilian world, I guess you can be a dictator because you can fire people pretty easily, and the only thing theoretically that you have to follow is the law. But then again, an awful lot of people break the law and expect subordinates to break the law or to circumvent the law somehow, and that's where he was coming from. That was his worldview.
Did he expected the people that worked for him to break the law?
Well, when he would give, and I think I've told you this many times, when he would tell me that he wanted to do something, 100% of the time I check with the White House counsel, because oftentimes he wouldn't have the authority to do what he wanted to do. I'm not recommending anything to anybody. I'm just saying, other than that, when you're looking to vote for someone, regardless, you got to look at the character and all of those kind of things, and then start looking at the individual's policies. We can always, even if you're a conservative Republican, much of what's gone on the last 3.5 years hasn't been what you wanted to have happen to the country. But we can get by it, because you might have a Republican come in the future. But if a person's character isn't at least minimally acceptable, then I think that person can do a lot more damage.
It is four-star General John Kelly speaking on tape to Michael Schmidt of the New York Times. Kelly also spoke to the Atlantic's editor-in-chief, Jeffrey Goldberg, for a new profile of Donald Trump that outlines what Goldberg calls the former president's deepening preoccupation with dictators and his disdain for the American military. The title of the piece quotes Trump as once having said, "I need the kind of generals that Hitler had." Trump adding, people who were totally loyal to him, that follow orders. Trump made the remark during a private conversation in the White House, according to two people who overheard the comment. Goldberg asked retired General Kelly this week about Trump's remarks concerning German generals. Kelly told Goldberg when Trump raised the subject, he responded by asking, "Do you mean Bismarck's generals?" Kelly went on, quote, "I mean, I knew he didn't know who Bismarck was or about the Franco-Prussian War. I said, do you mean the Kaiser's generals? Surely you can't mean Hitler's generals." And he said, yeah, Hitler's generals, quoting Trump there. Kelly explained to Goldberg that Rommel had to commit suicide after taking part in a plot against Hitler. Kelly said Trump was not acquainted with Rommel. Let's bring in the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, Jeffrey Goldberg, and staff writer at The Atlantic, Anne Applebaum. Good morning to you both. Jeffrey, just extraordinary stuff from General Kelly there, combined with what he told Mike Schmidt there on tape for the New York Times. There's been criticism from General Kelly of Donald Trump, not this direct, and perhaps not so direct about his praise for Hitler and wanting his generals to be loyal to him the way Hitler's generals were, of course, not knowing the history of the repeated plots against Hitler by his own military. What stood out to you in your conversation?
Well, it's just that it's the comprehensive ignorance, I think, of history. Look, we don't expect presidents to be historians. But they have to be aware of what's happened before them, and they have to be aware of broad trends, geopolitical trends, historical trends. But I think Donald Trump lived in a kind of vacuum of his own making, in which he would take little snippets of information that he's heard and turn them into full narratives about the way the world worked. And what really struck me the most, and we've been talking about this for years now, is the complete lack of a learning curve on the part of the former president. In other words, John Kelly, Marine General, Chief of Staff, says, Hitler's generals tried to kill him multiple times. And he said, and Donald Trump said, no, they didn't. So it's you can live in a bubble of your own creation. Now that's fine for a lot of people, but it's not fine for a president of the United States. Obviously the other piece of this, to me, and again, I've been reporting on this for years, is his very strange disdain for service people, particularly those who were captured, going back to John McCain, and even George H.W. Bush, who he called a loser for being shot down by the Japanese in World War II. The disdain, as you note before, for people who were wounded in combat. Multiple examples in my story of his desire to have big military parades, but without amputees, because, as you reported, they make him look bad. So, I mean, there's a whole range of things here. We've been talking about these things for a while. This is more and more evidence to suggest that he has a very, very dysfunctional relationship with the ideas that animate U.S. military service.
Jeff, it's interesting that John Kelly is speaking to you, speaking to Mike Schmidt now, so soon and close to the election. Did you get a sense from him in your interviews about what he thinks a second Trump term might look like, and what would be different in terms of the guardrails that we were talking about earlier in a second term?
It's a very good question, and we've heard this not only from John Kelly, but essentially, if you talk to anyone of the so-called grown-ups who served in the first administration, they understand that the guardrails are going to be down. Our colleague at The Atlantic, David Frum, said that the issue with the next Trump term, a theoretical next Trump term, is that the velociraptors have learned how to turn the door handles, which I think is a very vivid description of what could happen. In other words, last time, let's say the authoritarian impulses that a lot of people around Trump believe he has. John Kelly said this, obviously, according to Bob Woodward, Mark Milley, Jim Mattis, the former Secretary of Defense. They believe that he has authoritarian impulses, but what we saw in the first term was a lack of ability or will or hard work to make those changes in the government, make those changes in America that he wanted to. But now, combine the fact that he won't hire people like Jim Mattis, Rex Tillerson, H.R. McMaster, John Kelly. He's promised not to hire people like that, people with broad experience and probity and intellectual capacity. He's promised not to hire them, and they've figured out where they went wrong, let's say on the, immigration issues, for instance. I think that all of this group, including John Bolton, the former national security advisor, no softy, obviously, in a whole bunch of issues, believe that it could be a much more dangerous administration because he has a better sense, or the people around him have a better sense of what he wants to do or what he can achieve using the right mechanisms.
Anne, I think back, reading your works, reading your books, reading your warnings about the twilight of democracy.
Yeah.
Many people talked about catastrophizing this past week. As I've said on this show since Monday, the Wall Street Journal mocked the, quote, fascist meme, mocked The Atlantic, mocked other people who had been raising these concerns. And yet you now have the former president's longest-serving chief of staff saying he's a fascist. You have the former president's chairman of the Joint Chiefs saying that Donald Trump was fascist to the core. You have Donald Trump saying over the past week he's going to arrest his political opponents, that they are enemies of the state. Nancy Pelosi, Adam Schiff, he said he wants to shut down CBS because he didn't like how they edited an interview. He's also threatened Comcast. He's threatened ABC. He's threatened everybody that stands in his way. And yet, so many people I talk to are just numb. They're not listening.
Can't comprehend.
I talk to some of the most highly educated people, and they'll say, are you concerned about Donald Trump? Talking about using the military against his political opponents. Oh, I didn't hear that. And then you play the quote for them, or you show them the quote. They go, oh, he doesn't mean that. I'm sorry, but is this how it happens here? Is this how it happens here?
First, let me say about the Wall Street Journal article, it was particularly